Hello, and thank you for joining us on today's Ask Andrew show, Canada's first Facebook live streaming family law question and answer show. My name is Andrew Feldstein, and I'm the principal of the Feldstein Family Law Group. We have offices in Markham, Vaughan, Mississauga, and Oakville in order to assist you in your family law needs. Both myself and the entire firm practice exclusively in the area of family law in order to ensure that we're familiar and ready to help. Today, our special guest is Debbie Miles Sr. Debbie is the founder and director of Side by Side Supervised Access. Debbie is a registered social worker with a BA in psychology and over 20 years of working with families, children, and youth. Debbie and I, among other things, will be discussing supervised access. So without further ado, welcome, Debbie.
Hi, thank you for having me, Andrew.
It's a pleasure having you. And supervised access is an interesting problem we get into in family law because we have far too many cases where people are saying one parent is doing all sorts of things to the other parent, I should say the other parent, to the child or children, and they don't trust the parent. And that leads to a need for supervised access. So I'm going to start with trying to learn more about you. How did you become qualified to be a supervised access worker?
Well, first, as a parent, and secondly, I've worked in the field for quite some time. I've worked was a volunteer at a supervised access center. I also worked at Children Aids. And so in my work, I realized that there was a need, that something needed to change when it came to around supervised access. And I've also have the education. I have a BA, as you had mentioned, in psychology, and I'm also a registered social worker. I also sit on Supervised Visitation Network Association Board, and I provide services around understanding family. And so that's my passion to doing that and sort of helping, make me qualified to really help families in supervised access.
So that leads to a couple of questions for my mind for our viewers. The first one deals with, you talked about a supervised access center. You want to explain what is a supervised access center?
So our access center, I'm proud to say, looks like a home. So when a court has stated that a family needs to have their visit supervised on site at an access center, the center really allows parents and their child to have a visit in an environment that is natural, such as our center in that way is we really have things that are child focused. So we have different board games, different activities for parents to do with their child here at the center, and it is supervised and supported by a worker. So the parent will come to the center and have a minimum of 2 hours visit with their child, and it is supported by us. Parents can watch a couple of movies. Parents usually sometimes will order food, play games, and it's really to help build a parent and their child's relationship while they're dealing with custody and access.
Okay, now you said at your center, where is your center located?
So our new center, we've moved recently to a new center. We're in Ajax. We're at 487 West New Road, Unit 9 in Ajax. And so we've always been in Ajax for our center. We provide community access in either Toronto or Peel, but our physical space is in Ajax.
Okay, so one of the things that people may not appreciate is that a lot of supervised access centers take place in a very artificial environment, like a gymnasium at a school or at a community center. That says to me, when I've had clients who've had to go through that, they go there and they say, am I supposed to have any real type of 2-hour parenting time when I'm sitting there with my child or children being supervised in a gymnasium and there's 10 other kids seeing at the same time? And when I hear what you've described as your setting, to me sounds a lot better because it's at something that at least resembles some normalcy in a abnormal situation when a parent has to be supervised.
Exactly. And so when we were designing this space, it was really important that we made it natural. I remember the first time when we had the space, we had a 4-year-old came in and he said to me, he says, I like this. I think I'll sleep here. right? And that was important because we said to parents, we can't change the courts for you, but what we can do is help you, like you say, to make the space look natural. And so with our center is what's unique is that it's one parent at a time that have their visits supported and supervised. And so our goal is once a parent, for example, Easter is coming up. So we always encourage parents, if your visit is on-site, let's see what we can do to be creative so that it's natural. So parents will come and do an Easter hunt inside the center with their child. They'll paint Easter eggs and things like that, just to make it, as you said, it's really important for parents to feel that, this is natural. I'm having this time with my child and it's not so artificial.
Well, and there's also, I think I've always been concerned when you have to use some of these centers, is it sends a real negative message to children.
Mm-hmm.
That the only way they can see their parent is in a gymnasium with somebody watching. Whereas to me, at the very least, hearing about your center, it sounds more like from a young child's perspective, well, mom or dad may be visiting a friend. Yes. And you're going over to the friend's house and we're hanging out at the friend's house.
Exactly.
And to me, that seems like a much better environment that's not sending that negative message about the parent to the child, that there's a problem with that parent. I think that's really important because in some cases, the supervision ends up being very short term and more to satisfy one person's concerns. And in other cases, it's absolutely critical.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
When I hear about your service that there's one child at a time, or I guess one family at a time, really.
Yes.
What is the cost of that for the 2 hours?
So for the 2 hours for on-site, it's $55 an hour, minimum 2 hours.
Okay, and is there an hourly rate beyond that?
No, that's the rate beyond that. So. Okay.
And do people have to live in Ajax or Peel to utilize your services? Or?
No, not at all. Not at all. So it's interesting because we will have clients from overseas that where sometimes you never really think that, somebody's from the States is calling to use our service. Because in some situation, mom and dad were together, dad lived in another country, family breaks down, dad decides to move back to the US or, somewhere 4 hours away from the area. And dad has an order that states that once a month he comes back to where the matrimonial home was and have his visit. So parents doesn't really have to live in our area to have access on site.
Okay, now do you do on-site supervised access as well?
Yes, so we do the.
Sorry, I meant off-site supervised.
Yes, so we do the off-site. We get a lot of calls for the off-site in the summertime, more so. So we would do things that are child-focused. We get a lot of museums. We get bowling, seem to be very popular. The library, dinner. We've actually had parents ask us to go to church with them and their child for visit. So we do our best. We, as you said before, right? It's to make parents feel that things are still normal, natural. So we do our best to really work with parents and says, okay, what was it that you were doing with your child before in the community that your child enjoyed, right? That is age appropriate. And so we do those things in the community.
Now, the thing that some people might wonder is, why do they need somebody's services like you? And unfortunately, when we do the kind of work we do, we sometimes see lots of allegations. They may be true, they may not be true, but a court wants to put a child first and make sure that the child is safe. One way of doing that is supervision. Do you write reports about what happens during your supervised access sessions?
So we do observation notes. We don't make recommendation unless it's a therapeutic, but we do observation notes with that.
Now, the critical part there is you have a situation where somebody has been accused of communicating inappropriately, doing inappropriate things with the children, and the idea of the supervisor being there is to protect the child. Exactly. But those observation notes, from my perspective as a lawyer, are critical, because when I have a client who is being accused of all these awful things and the observation notes are glowing, saying this parent was terrific with the child, they were engaged, they were communicating, yes, and you get a number of those observation notes, you're now getting the material and the evidence that you need to marshal for a judge to say, we don't need the supervision anymore. And some people might think, well, geez, can't the person just come in and act and get away with it for a couple of hours? And and some people that are really good can, and other people have such hatred for their former spouse, they just can't resist and they can't hold back. And I'm sure sometimes you're there and you have to remind people you can't say or do that.
Exactly. And so one of the things we do for that is that when we meet with a parent to do their intake, we clearly say to the parent, what is it that the opposing parties state in? What are some of the things that we can give you support with? So we'll have a parent says, you know what, the mom says, I don't know how to change the diaper, or I don't know how to look after the child, or say things that are inappropriate, or things like that, right? And so we said, okay, so let's work on that. Let's make sure that your moment is your moment with your child, right? And so that parent, and as you said, some parents, if they really can't hold back sometimes, if they really just doesn't like the other parent, it comes out, right? And sometimes we'll reflect in that notes, and parents will, the good thing is we find sometimes parents will look at the notes and see what they need to change to make that connection with their child, to improve.
And ultimately what people need to understand is courts don't want to impose supervised access because it's artificial. Mm-hmm. And that means the objective of supervised access is to get that parent to a place of not needing supervision anymore.
Exactly.
Because it really isn't a permanent solution. I mean, clearly most people can't afford $55 every time to visit their child for 2 hours. Mm-hmm. It's an expensive process, but it can be critical at getting you moving back in the correct direction. You talked a little bit about the offsite, and I want to have a discussion about that as well. Clearly, that's something for people who have more resources rather than people who are financially challenged. But what is the cost of an offsite?
So the cost of the offsite is $55 plus the mileage, the travel. So the travel outside of our area. So, for example, we'll have a parent says, you know what, the middle ground is in Milton, or the furthest we've gone is Richmond Hill to Vaughan. So there's a travel cost for that.
Now, is that time?
It's just a flat fee of $35.
Okay. And what if a client phones up and says, I want to see my child all day on Sunday from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. Can they do that and pay per hour?
So when they do that for such a long period of time, we sit with the parent and decide, okay, depending on how long, we'll say, okay, this is what we would do to negotiate what the fee would be at that point. Okay. But the parents we've had parents that ask for a long time, hours.
Okay, mm-hmm. I'm trying to get an understanding of it, because people who can afford it, they say, I want to see my child, and that's the most important thing in my world, is spending time with my child, and I'll pay for it. And I want to be able to exercise the time at my home or mm-hmm. wherever. Now, we do have a question that came in, which is, what happens if my ex and I can't agree on who should be the supervisor? Now, I think that's a great question, because in most of our cases, when somebody says we need supervision, it doesn't always mean that the supervision has to be an independent third party like Debbie. It can be, you start off trying to say, okay, do you trust my client's mother or father or brother or sister, and see that if family members can supervise instead of hiring third parties, because it's going to be easier to get somebody on a consensual basis, or even a judge, to buy into supervision if it's a relative, for the obvious reason of no cost, and it's easier, especially if they happen to live in the same home. So there's usually a negotiation process. In some cases, someone will say, I don't trust any of their family members, I'm not going to agree to it. And then you may be in front of a judge and arguing in front of a judge as to whether or not these relatives are appropriate supervisors. And people need to understand, your mother or father may be aligned with you in a family law dispute, but where I think most courts look at it and say, mother and father usually care more about the grandchild being taken care of properly, so that if their child was abusive or was an alcoholic or was a drunk, they're, I should say, addicted to drugs. But if they had these kind of problems, they would be more concerned about protecting the child than they would their child. In other words, protect the grandchild over the child. So that's the usual assumption. And when we get down that road, it then becomes a question of, are those people appropriate? Are they not appropriate? If those people aren't appropriate, or nobody is willing, or no one is available, then there becomes a discussion of a supervised center, such as yourself, or somebody in the community. Now, we talked earlier about those community centers that I'm not a fan of that are in a gymnasium. And practical reality is those usually cost a lot less, or they may be at no charge. And that may be all that people can afford.
Yes.
And if that's what they can afford, well, that's what they can afford. It's better that they're seeing their child in that setting than nowhere.
Exactly.
But people who can afford it, this is a great opportunity to be able to see your child in a much, much better setting. So the question you get into is, getting back to what the viewer said, what happens if the other person doesn't agree? Well, then you may be going to court and you may be asking a judge to make an order. And if you're asking a judge to make an order for a supervised access center, you're going to need a good, strong case. I know you said about somebody who doesn't know how to change a diaper, or, I think of some of the comments I've heard over the years. It's usually, not always, it's usually the dads don't know how to bathe the children, only order in food or will warm up frozen food, don't know how to change a diaper. And I look at my client and say, a judge is going to look at it and say, better the child has hot dogs all weekend and pizza and have a relationship with dad than eats vegetables and spends time with mom.
Exactly.
The child should eat vegetables, but if the child doesn't eat vegetables, better to have a relationship with dad. So
exactly,
it's prioritizing things, and you got to appreciate that, not changing a diaper. I've had many fathers say, I know how to change a diaper, but, I don't get an opportunity to do it. Okay, well, now you're going to get lots of opportunities.
But you need to do that, yeah.
And you say to the other parent, you know what? You may actually enjoy the break of not having to change the diapers and cook the food and clean up and do all the little things. It may be nice to have a break. So part of it is dealing with someone who can be really attached to a child and doesn't appreciate what supervision is for. Supervision happens in cases when there's real problems. Like I said before, abuse, addiction, somebody leaving the children alone. Like I always remember one case I had when it came to addiction. The other lawyer says to me, well, other than the one DUI, what's the problem with mom?
Okay.
And the judge, when we went into court, really put it best. She says, well, I'm looking at what your client blew to the other lawyer on his breathalyzer. And she said, this isn't one DUI because she blew so high that she shouldn't be able to walk, never mind get in a car and drive.
Wow.
And that mother needed to have supervised access. I think it went on for years, where she had, when the child got picked up, she actually had to blow into a portable device once there was no supervision to prove she didn't have an issue. So, that's the kind of case where, there needs to be supervision. Because how do you have a 5-year-old going to the home of someone who is clearly intoxicated?
Yeah. And how do they have the ability to parent?
Exactly. And that's why when clients come in and they say to me, well, he needs supervision or she needs supervision because, she's never been around the child alone and she never had to make all the meals for the child. You know what? When the baby is born, the first child, we've all never been parents before and we all have to learn.
Yes. And make some mistakes along the way.
Exactly. And it's not the end of the world. If you have a diaper that was too wet and the child has a diaper rash, well, you know what? As I say to people, that parent's going to have to deal with that crying baby.
Exactly. And that's how that parent learned. As a grandmother, I totally forgot how to even change my grandson when he was born. I was like, how do you do all these things again? Right. And as you said, as a new parent, they have to learn, it's just, you learn as a parent.
And the other thing people have to learn when they're putting forward the suggestion of supervision, and why I say, really think hard and carefully whether it's something you need, because we deal in a world where in family law, there's already a fair bit of conflict when there's a separation and divorce. And if you're suggesting to the other side that they need to be supervised, that's almost like a nuclear bomb you're detonating on them. Because if you're somebody that doesn't have those significant problems and somebody is saying that you need supervised parenting, that's the kind of thing you're going to fight. And that's increased conflict tenfold. I've had some lawyers over the years come to me and say, well, my client wants your client to have supervised access. And I say, why? Well, I gave some of the reasons I said before. I said, you realize if I take that to my client, how angry and offended they're going to be. And then they're just going to dig in their heels. And most likely, human nature being what it is, they're going to try and strike back at your client somewhere along the same lines. And it just escalates the conflict. So that's why I really get to, when you're saying that there needs to be supervised access and suggesting it, make sure that there's some teeth to your allegations. It's something real.
Mm-hmm.
And you also have to consider whether it will be a grandparent, a sibling, because when you are suggesting that kind of supervision of a relative, it is a lot easier for the person to digest. But there's more layers to that kind of supervised visits that you have to think about. If I agree, for example, I split up with my spouse and now I'm staying at my sibling's house, so I say that my sibling and their spouse will be supervisors, I need them to buy into it. Because if I have that child all weekend, I'm saying to my sibling and their spouse that one of them has to be around me all weekend, every other weekend. That could last for a while. That's a real significant commitment by a third party.
Mm-hmm.
And it's important that you have that discussion to let them know what commitment they're doing.
Yeah, exactly.
If I'm that parent, I'd rather have my relative, no offense to you, that I don't have to
Don't
pay
take it.
than paying a minimum of $55 every time to see my child. But you really need to make sure. So sometimes you have multi-generational families living in a home.
Yeah.
The brother, the sister, the mother, the father. It's easier because you have one of four people that need to be present.
Mm-hmm.
But then you have cases where you have one parent and they're an hour drive from home. Well, now that becomes a tremendous commitment because that parent has to come with you to pick up the parenting time, return with the child, and be at their home. That's a real commitment that I've had situations where we've agreed, and then 2 months later, the other parent comes into my office with the child. I can't do this. I love my child, but I can't do this all weekend anymore. I didn't think it was going to last this long. So, sometimes you have people who do that and supplement it with your service.
Yes. Yeah. And as you said, parents really have to think about the commitment piece when it comes to the supervision, right? Both parents have to be willing and open to follow through in their commitment to it. So if the custodial parent is the one that says, okay, fine, if his mother is going to supervise, you also have to be committed to say, I'll drive the child every Saturday from here to 10 kilometers from where they live. That commitment everyone has to be involved in that commitment.
That's right. And sometimes people want to back down from the commitment shortly after it happens, which then interferes with the parenting time because they forget about the importance of the child seeing the parent. And I see I have another question. Unfortunately, turning 50 means I need glasses now. What are the benefits to the child during supervised access? Do you want to handle that one, Debbie, from your perspective?
So the benefits when a child is having supervised visit is that it is really, as you said, if there was concern about that parent really speaking negatively about the other parent, that child is really getting supported and it's safe. It's a safe space for that child to have their visit with that parent. If that parent is struggling in their relationship with that child, if that parent hasn't seen that child in around 8 months, sometimes parents will come in a visit and not sure how to participate in the visit. And so having someone there really sort of help lead the parent in how to really begin that relationship with their child and what they need to do. So, for example, we would say to a parent prior to a visit, if a parent is struggling, what is it that you would like to do? You haven't seen your child in 8 months or, a year, and you don't know anything about that child is also uncomfortable. So both of you are sitting and doing a visit and not understanding. So having that space allow the parent to support the child to feel safe and for us to help the parent build a relationship and encourage, and sometimes we'll jump in if a parent is struggling.
And what viewers need to understand, there is an assumption because the Divorce Act says that there should be maximum contact with both parents. It is clear that it's in the best interest of children to have a good, positive relationship with both parents.
Yes.
And like you're saying, what you're describing is really, in some situations, there's reason for supervision. In other situations, it's been the absence of one parent for whatever reason. And this is what allows that relationship to reconnect in a safe environment for the child, so that hopefully one day the parent doesn't need the supervision anymore, and the child and that parent can have a good, positive relationship, because there's no doubt the child will end up a better adult if they have a good, positive relationship with both of their parents and not just one parent.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's something people have to really focus on. And in family law, too often people forget what it is about the children is what's best in their best interest.
In their best interest.
So when parents say, I have rights, I tell them, no, you don't have rights, you have responsibilities. And
Yes.
you've got to realize it's responsibilities to your child to make your child the best person that your child can be. And when I say your child, that means the we between the two parents who both love their children, and they got to remember to put their children ahead of their hate for the other spouse.
And that's always a challenge, just sometimes for parents, right? To put the we aside, to say, okay, it's about the child.
Some parents really struggle with it, and some parents are really fast to get on and realize that and get on board with it. The challenge is, too often in cases, one parent doesn't necessarily have limits and exposes the children to all sorts of things, and the other parent wants what's best for the child and struggles with having to deal with all the negative conflict and negative comments that are coming out about that parent. And that can be really challenging.
Exactly.
We just got another question came in, which is, what is the difference between supervised access and child therapy? Now, do you want to handle it, Debbie? You look like you're ready to go on that one.
Okay. So with therapeutic access, in therapeutic access, it's usually recommended when a parent has been absent from a child's life for a period of time. So example, a parent has not seen the child in 2 years. The child was exposed to an abuse, a domestic abuse, and there's some trauma that is still there. And so now the child hasn't seen the parent for a while, and now they need to start to rebuild their relationship. And so the therapeutic really provide the parents the tool and the child the support that they need in order to rebuild the relationship. And from a theory perspective of what type of theory stuff do we need to incorporate in the therapeutic. The supervised access is, as you said, it's temporary. This parent needs to have a few of these supervised visits. It needs to be someplace that is safe. And so the parents will come in and have their visit supervised. It is not as intense as the therapeutic access.
Okay, that's a great description of what the differences are. And at the end of the day, people have to realize these are in situations where the children are really struggling, or one of the parents is really struggling, because most cases, the vast majority of cases, never require supervised parenting, and even fewer require supervised parenting by a third party such as yourself. So I do really commend you, because the service you're providing of doing this in a home at a reasonable price, because there's no travel costs, really does help a lot of people. Because if that child isn't seeing their parent, it's a problem, and there's frequently significant wait lists to get in the community-based supervision. And the longer the delay goes where a parent isn't seeing the child, the worse it is for reintegration, the worse it is for the children. And so the fact that for $55 for 2 hours, somebody can come out to your center, I think that's really a tremendous service for people who are in the position that they need it, because they can get in much faster with you.
Yes.
It's less expensive than doing it in the community, because they don't have that additional travel time that has.
That's right.
And let's face it, when people are going through a divorce, it's a time that they're bleeding money between lawyers, therapists, counselors, people such as yourself, and being able to do something at a reasonable price is really helpful. Debbie, I see that our time is up for today's show, but I really wanted to say thank you, because I think you brought some really great information for our viewers to understand about supervised access. So thank you for coming out today.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
The next Ask, and I forgot to say this, you can visit Debbie at sidebysideservices.ca if you need to retain her or her group's services. And our next Ask Andrew show is on May 13th, 2019 at our usual time of 1 o'clock. If you have any requests or ideas for future shows, please email them to us at info@feldsteinfamilylaw.com. And thank you for watching.
Thank you.